Welcome to PO Like a Pro, Connected Automation for Project-Intensive Businesses. So today we're going to walk through the Core Cloud Systems purchase order application, but before we get there, I'd like to take us through a few PowerPoint slides just to talk a little bit about TimberScan, the AP workflow and approval experience, and how the Core Cloud Systems purchase order application integrates and works hand in hand with both TimberScan and Sage 300. Okay, so here we go. Start off with the Core's mission statement. So our mission is to provide a complete purchase-to-pay solution that connects everyone in the construction industry and beyond with one system, one platform, one data entry point that never requires the handling of paper. And we have, as we kind of dig into the history of our applications, we started with TimberScan, but over the course of time, that AP workflow process has become more purchase to pay. And that's really our focus today, is on that consistent purchase to pay solution from start to finish. So Core Associates was founded in 2008, the proud maker of TimberScan, the product that I alluded to before. It is the only AP automation system designed exclusively for Sage 300 CRE. It imitates but not replicates much of the data that and much of the user experience that takes place inside Sage 300 CRE. We look at time-consuming manual processes in construction and real estate companies and develop features and new products to automate them. The Core Care's motto is to listen to our clients. We have over 35,000 users of the application. We were acquired recently by Avid Exchange. Our virtual workforce consists of 65 associates in 19 states and on 3 continents. So we are very well distributed throughout the country and also the world. Core's evolution of automation, AP automation rules-based routing with TimberScan. So the concept and the idea is to allow us to create that rules-based routing process. And we started with AP routing and approval. That's where TimberScan came into existence initially. We then expanded from TimberScan to make the product more than just AP, but also an enterprise content management system, meaning you can manage all of your contents, manage all of your invoices, all of your documents and content within one application. We've also built tools like Capture OCR, which allows us to be able to take an invoice, use optical character recognition, and extract information from that particular invoice to eliminate data entry. And then the product that we're going to focus on today, specifically within Core Cloud Systems, Core Cloud started out as an electronic forms tool, but we have since expanded the use of Core Cloud to include apps and portals. And then also another cloud-based solution that we've developed for TimberScan is called TimberScan Go, and it allows for cloud-based approval of invoices on any computer or any mobile device. So with Core Cloud Systems, as I mentioned, it started out as basically as a forms tool, but we took the concept of a form and decided to expand the functionality to allow us to do things like remote time entry, remote purchasing, advanced purchasing, and credit card reconciliation. So everything that we have built within the Core Cloud Systems application is designed with 3 basic tenets in mind. 1, everything is built around a form. So everything starts with a form, whether that's a form that's being filled out on a mobile device or it's being filled out on someone's desktop or what have you. It starts with a form. And then from there, we build a workflow, if you will, around that form. So regardless of whether we're talking about remote time, we're talking about purchasing, we're talking about credit cards, everything starts with the form. We then take that form, it gets processed through these particular applications, and then the third part of the tenant is it gets sent off to Sage 300 and to TimberScan for further processing in both of those applications. This is kind of an overview snapshot of TimberScan today. So if you look in the center, we have TimberScan and all of the various tools that are built around the, we'll call it the desktop experience. So we have TimberScan where someone could be logging into the application and processing their AP invoices and sending that information onto Sage 300. Built around the TimberScan application are the cloud tools that are, they're not separate per se. They are basically in support of TimberScan in the sense that I'm still processing the same way as if I were in TimberScan, but I'm using cloud-based technology to be able to do things like purchasing and credit card reconciliation and mobile approval of invoices. Okay, so today we're going to focus on the purchase order aspect of Core Cloud. And as you can see, there are actually going to be a couple of different areas that we'll cover. One will be remote purchasing, where basically it allows for someone to be able to create a purchase order using any type of mobile device and then be able to process that purchase order and send it on to TimberScan and Sage 300. So some of the basic tools that remote purchasing allows: processing POs and creating receiving tickets from the field, fast, easy, simple, using any type of mobile device. It complements the AP workflow solution by automatically capturing supporting documents like purchase orders and receiving tickets, capturing delivery tickets and automatically sending them to AP workflow. So now we have supporting documents and we can accommodate 2- and 3-way matches. Purchase order approval eliminates the need to route invoices that have met dollar and receipt standards. And also purchase orders and change orders are uploaded to Sage commitments without double entry. So very important, when we're creating these mobile purchase orders, what we are also doing is we're sending that information over to Sage 300 to create the commitment in Sage 300. What that then allows is now we have the documents, we have the data that we've sent to Sage 300 and also to TimberScan, the documents themselves, so that when we're processing an invoice, we can reference the commitment. We have the commitment and all of the line item information from the commitment that's already been created from the purchase order. And then we just have the supporting documents that were created from the PO and the receiver. All right, so let's go one step further because we're going to talk about basically two different tools from within Core Cloud Systems. The one that we're going to start with would be the remote purchasing application, creating those purchase orders and those receivers. But we also have an advanced purchasing tool. And what advanced purchasing allows us to do is to actually kind of dig a little bit deeper. If we wanted to start doing things that would be more aligned with certain items that might be associated with certain vendors, for example, almost creating like an item list if need be, doing receivers, doing change orders, those types of things are done in advanced purchasing, and also an automatic 3-way match that takes place in TimberScan. So with advanced purchasing, we're creating the purchase orders from any device, submitting the PO, drilling down if need be, sending the approved POs to vendors by email. We're doing a custom materials list if need be and managing those lists from within the application, receiving and allocating wherever those receivers need to go in terms of associating with the purchase order. And then also, as we do with everything else, integrating with Sage 300 CRE and TimberScan, where we import the data and then send the actual documents on to TimberScan and to TimberScan AIM for 3-way match purposes, which we're going to do an actual 3-way match demonstration of that here in just a few minutes. Okay, so at this point, let's actually go into the software and we will start to kind of walk through the application. So I've logged into the various applications for anyone that currently uses TimberScan. Obviously, this probably looks somewhat familiar. This is the AP invoice entry screen, which I'll get to in a few moments. But again, we're starting with, and we're backing to that point of purchase to pay. We're going to start at the purchase order level, and then we're going to work forward. So in Core Cloud, which I've logged into already, this would be the user experience when you first log into the application. And just to kind of take us through a few of the tools and the way that the application works. So I've logged in, and basically I'm sitting here at my home page. And what I can do from here is I have my dashboard in front of me. So if I wanted to be able to look at, for example, my forms, any form that's been assigned to me that I might potentially work on. That could be a purchase order, but it also could be a credit card receipt. It could be an expense reimbursement form. These are the forms that have been assigned to me. Any open issues, something that I may have created a form, but I haven't, or maybe it's an unfinished form that I haven't created. Anything where I've gone through and maybe I've created a form, but there are still some open issues. This gets into a little bit of customization where you can start to take forms and you can create some dialogue, if you will, back and forth between users. You can also, along with forms, those forms can also become documents. So anything that you can create a form from can also become a PDF document if you needed to be able to see that. In your inbox would be if I were an approver and someone else were filling out, for example, a form, maybe it could be a purchase order, what have you, and they send that purchase order to me for review and approval. It's sitting in my inbox. And then, of course, in addition to my forms, you can also set up the system so that you can have just specific jobs that you might work on and the forms that are associated with those jobs. So down here, as I mentioned, Core Cloud Systems started as a forms tool. That was the basics and the basic concept of Core Cloud to begin with. Form management, which I'm not going to get into, basically what it does is it would allow someone, if they want, to actually go in and create their own forms. So it's not just something where these forms have to be all done programmatically per se. The whole idea behind the Forms Wizard is to allow for someone to be able to build their own forms and to be able to go in and start using them for whatever purpose they need. So think of someone who might potentially be using an Excel spreadsheet, for example, to be able to create some sort of a process where they're using an Excel spreadsheet for an expense reimbursement or something like that. What the forms management tool does is it allows someone to go in and actually create a form on the fly that they can then use for their own purposes, and they can build routing rules around them and those types of things. Down here, we then have the various applications that I referenced when we were going through the PowerPoint slides. Of course, as I mentioned, we do have a credit card reconciliation tool, expense approvals, field purchasing, time entry, and we're going to talk about the advanced purchasing here in a few moments. Let's start with field purchasing. So when I go into field purchasing, basically, I have three basic functions that I can do here. Start with a field PO form. I open it up, and it automatically increments the PO number for me. And what I could also do, there's certain things that you can have set up if I needed to. So if I wanted today's date to default in, I can do that. Now, I think it's important to also note that this is all of this entire application is designed to work on any type of device. So basically what I can do here is I can shrink this down, and I could be working on my phone, or I could be working on an iPad. I could be out in the field somewhere where I can just simply pull up on my phone. I can call up my Core Cloud Systems app from basically something that you download from the App Store. I've now called up my field purchase order form, and I can start actually processing a purchase order right from here. So it's designed to work mobilely. And again, if you wanted to process using your mobile device, you're using an iPad, or for example, I'm just sitting here at my desktop, I can process any way that I want. You can just go through and start filling out this information. So let's say I want to continue on with this form. Notice how when I'm doing a search here, I'm now searching the vendor master file from Sage 300. So another important aspect of the way that the Core Cloud Systems application works is that it's tying to Sage 300 the same way that TimberScan does. So if I'm doing a vendor search, I'm doing a job search, cost code, whatever it might be, I'm searching the master files from within Sage 300 the same way. If I want to charge this to A1 Electric, same thing with job. I go in here and I'm searching the job file. I'm charging this to job 03001. I can put in my, purchase order amount here, who it was requested by. We can put in a description, we'll say it was tools or something like that. And then I can get down here into the various line item information. So if I needed to, say what cost code I want to charge this to, we can do something like that. Put in a description if I need to. And then we start to plug in, for example, my quantity and what the unit price is. Maybe it's $100, so I'm spending, whatever it is, $1,000. And then if I needed to, if I click on new entry, it allows me to then go in and just add another line item. So in the same way, if you think about this conceptually from the TimberScan perspective, where I go in, I'm charging an invoice to a vendor in a job, and I have multiple line items, I can do the same thing here. If I needed to attach any type of documentation, a quote or what have you, to that purchase order, I can do that. Again, if I'm using my phone, I can take a picture of that particular document and then I can just pull it from the gallery if I need to. Signature or e-sign if I needed to do that. And then I have the option down here at the bottom of either routing or submitting. These items, they work separately. So what routing does is it's saying, okay, I want to route this particular form, this purchase order, to someone kind of on the fly. So I want them to go into their inbox and I want them to look at this form, but they're not necessarily someone that's part of we'll call it a workflow group. It's basically an on-the-fly route. Whereas when I hit submit, what that does is that invokes the business rules. So then someone could actually, if I said, when I fill out a purchase order, the business rule says that this then has to go on to the purchasing manager. Maybe it has to go to my supervisor, whatever it might be. I'm then invoking that process when I submit the form. So these are the basics of a purchase order. And when I'm finished, again, I just hit submit and off it goes. Okay, so let's say we've done that. And then we come back in here. And maybe what I do is I go through and I fill out a receiver against that particular purchase order. So again, same concept applies. This is a form where someone is coming in, they're filling out the information, who received it, what's the receiving ticket number, it's the receiving ticket number 100, today's date, for example. We go through and set up the information, and then I reference that particular purchase order that or commitment, either one, that may have been associated with that particular receiver. And I go down through and I do the same thing. So I'm just filling out my information, attaching any information that I need associated with this, and I go ahead and submit my receiver. So now what I've done is I've created that, we'll call it a two-way match, right? I now have my purchase order. I've now received against it. I may have ordered 100, but now I only received 80, but now I've confirmed all of that. And that information then gets compiled and it gets sent on to TimberScan and it gets sent on to Sage 300 eventually. We're not there quite yet, but that's the concept. It's what did we initially write the purchase order for? What did we actually receive? And it's doing that, that two-way match of looking at the purchase order and then creating the receiver to attach to it and saying exactly what we received. Once we've processed the purchase order and receiver, just for a moment, I'm just going to back up, go back to home here, and let's just say, for example, that, as a supervisor, maybe I have received someone's purchase order. So I just come in here, I look at their, their field PO, I see how it's been filled out. And if there's information that I need to fill in or things that I need to review and what have you, I can go ahead and do that. But again, once I'm finished, I go ahead and submit the form. And then again, it moves on to the next person in the routing chain if there is someone else. Now, ultimately, where the purchase order and receiver end up are in the approval grid. And it's important to note that the approval grid is designed to be kind of the last step, the final review for any of the purchase orders and receivers and associated receivers that we've created. So from the approval grid, what I'm doing here is I'm looking at what has been created so far. And then if I needed to, over here, I can simply come in as an approver and I can start going down through and I can approving these various purchase orders. What it also allows me to do is, because of the fact that I have, let's just say, supervisor rights, I could go through and delete it if I needed to. I can edit this. So if I want to call this up, I just click on this, and now I open up that particular purchase order, and I'm looking at the various information. And you see, this is a scenario where there were multiple lines created. I'm looking at the first line in front of me, but when I select the next line, I can just go out and I can start looking at that line if I want. So if we go back here to the actual approval grid, and again, I'm looking through the various items here. I click on which ones I want to approve and what have you. I can approve all of them if I need to, but ultimately what I'm able to do is down here at the bottom, I have a couple of action buttons that kind of complete, we'll call it the workflow process of these purchase orders and receivers. One is transferring to TimberScan and the other is the export. So the transfer to TimberScan allows me to take that information, send it over to TimberScan, and it goes into TimberScan AIM as supporting documents. So if it's a purchase order and or a receiver, it's now rendered into TimberScan and it can be called up in TimberScan. What the export does is it says, okay, create an export file that we're then going to send to Sage 300 CRE. It gets imported into Sage 300 CRE, and at that point, your commitments have then been created. So it's allowing for someone to be able to eliminate having to handwrite purchase orders, use some third-party application that doesn't integrate with Sage, doesn't integrate with TimberScan. Everything's integrated. I write my purchase order. I can actually create a commitment from that purchase order from here. I can do the receiving against the purchase order, and I can also render those documents into TimberScan. So when we look in TimberScan, basically what we have is here's an invoice that I've called up. I reference the commitment, and I have my field purchase order that I created, and I have my receiving ticket that's attached to the invoice. So I referenced the commitment in this case, and from there I was able to go out and attach the supporting documents, being the purchase order and receiver that were created initially in the field purchasing application, sent to TimberScan, and they're waiting now for the invoice to come in. So this completes the process of we'll call it the field purchasing, the mobile purchase order experience. Let's back up for just a minute. Let's get into the advanced purchasing for a few moments. So with advanced purchasing, I'm going to jump over here. This gives us a little bit more, we'll call it a little bit more functionality than field purchasing. It does a little bit more in terms of being able to manage, for example, item lists. So you can create your own item list if you want. You can attach item lists to vendors if need be. And then you can start processing transactions and do an actual true three-way match inside TimberScan. So if we walk through the process here, I'm going to start by creating a purchase order. The system automatically increments to the next PO, for example, and I can go in here and just say create. I'll specify if it's either a location, this could be a physical location such as a warehouse or what have you, or what job it might be associated with, who the vendor is, and then I just go ahead and I create that purchase order. Now from here, what I'll do is I'll select that PO, and down here, I can go in and I can start to search various items that I've built for that particular vendor. And if we want to take clips, for example, I can do that. So now what it does is it calls up from that particular vendor from A1 Electric, it said, okay, if I'm purchasing clips, I've built this little item file associated with A1 Electric, and I can then come in here and I can say, okay, they're normally, $1, $100, whatever it is, and I'll say that I want to buy 10 of them, and we'll just go through and we'll start to process here. Now, when I get through here, I can charge this directly to a GL account code if need be. But what I can also do is I can start to job cost this. So if, for example, this is for Northwest Food Warehouse, and we'll just go through and we'll code the rest of this. We'll say what it is, coordination, whatever. It's something like that. And at that point, we're just going to go ahead and save these changes. I've now created that purchase order. And what I can do is I can just go ahead right from here and I'll send that purchase order to the vendor. Specify their email address, submit it, off it goes. So I'm able to, in literally a matter of seconds, I created a purchase order. I actually brought up an item list that I had created associated with that particular vendor. I was able to then pick from the item list what their pricing is, so you can start to build this vendor pricing concept into the application, pull up that information, attach it to that particular purchase order, and then send it off to the vendor very quickly. Okay, now obviously there's also a change order concept here. We won't get into change orders, but obviously, it just kind of works where we created the purchase order and now we have some changes we need to add or subtract or whatever. Obviously, we can do that through here, same way as if we're creating a purchase order. Let's go to the receiving step next. So in here, I have my purchase order. I'm going to go ahead and select that purchase order. And I'm going to say, let's edit view. And I will create the receiver. And now what I've done is I've called up the line item information, whatever the dollar amount might be here. I can go through if I need to edit any of this information, I can. So if, for example, I ordered 10 and I only received, 5, I can say the date that it was received. We'll say it's today. Any comments that were associated with it, and what I actually received versus what I ordered. When I'm done, I can go ahead and save this receipt. That part is done. And then ultimately what I'm able to do using that same concept that we saw earlier, I can then export the purchase order, which will also export the receiver associated with it over to Sage 300 and also over to TimberScan. So the experience in TimberScan, in this case with advanced purchasing, can work a little bit differently. We can still reference the commitment if that's the scenario, but what we could also do is, let's say that we're not referencing a commitment. Let's pull that, whoops, sorry. Let's go here. And basically what we're doing is we're processing the invoice. Instead of referencing the commitment, what I can do, I can go into the supporting documents queue. I've created that purchase order and receiver, so we'll select this PO. We'll select this particular receiver. And as soon as I attach, what it will do is it will then take those particular documents, it will attach them, and it will create a true three-way match where it builds line item information right from the PO/receiver. So it pulled up the information associated with that purchase order and receiver as soon as I attached them, created the three-way match and pulled up the data for me here. And then of course I can go ahead and I can finish out this invoice. So a couple of different scenarios with field purchasing. We're referencing commitments. We're able to create the commitment and then reference it. Here, we're referencing the purchase order and or receiver, and that then builds the line item information using the true three-way match functionality from purchase order and receiver attached to invoice. Okay, and that's basically the concept behind the field purchasing, the remote purchasing application, and advanced purchasing with TimberScan. Obviously, with advanced, we can start to get into some other things like building an inventory file and working from inventory and doing inventory worksheets and those types of things. But for the purposes of processing purchase orders without necessarily referencing inventory, these two concepts are the method in which we do this within Core Cloud and send that data over to TimberScan and on to Sage 300.